For 9 months, babies are in complete contact with their mothers. They're listening to the mother's heartbeat, they're synchronized to the mother's respiratory pattern when they come out, and they depend on that contact.
You go through this incredible journey and process, and this new life emerges into the world. We feel this incredible energy, and there's this sensitive, this sacred moment that this mother and baby and family are meeting. We shouldn't be disturbing it.
When a child is born and actually is laid on the mother's stomach, and the child will naturally come up to the breast, the mother will naturally bring the child up to the breast, the baby's head is on the mother's chest, the heartbeat that was there for the entire development period is restored to the child, the safety, the touch, the comfort, and the bonding that is occurring during this time, which is more than just physical bonding, it's an energy bonding, is fulfilling the natural developmental process, assuring a happiness and a health to this child that is being welcomed and loved.
The baby comes out looking for the mother and reaching and sensing the mother and smelling the mother, and wants to be placed right on the skin of the mother, not somewhere else, right on the mother. Our modern research even proves that the mother is a better incubator and a better heater, much more efficient, and has the right moderation built in than these $1,000 cribs and expensive heaters and incubators.
Mothers are right around 98.6 degrees. Babies who are kept in contact with their mothers have that so-called thermoregulation run nicely by the mom, maybe with a blanket on top. They breathe in a different rhythm than babies who are separated from mothers. They have heartbeats that are a different rhythm than babies separated from their mothers. It's a medical issue. It's not a touchy-feely social issue. You know, the contact, the touch of a mother's hand changes a baby's state of being.
When the child is taken away from the mother during this birth process, this is the ultimate fear that a child could ever imagine. It's now thrust into space, like tumbling in space, lost with a connection. The significance is as profound physiological consequences on the hormonal system and belief system of the child.
If you look at the hormonal processes of birth, all the hormones that are active during pregnancy and labour particularly, and birth, you see that those hormones reach peak levels in the hour or so after birth for mother and baby, and they're putting both of them in an optimal situation to begin breastfeeding and to begin bonding and attachment.
It's an ideal time that they can see their baby in a special light, because he's in a special state of alertness. He's in the quiet, alert state. And in this state, he's interested in his mother, and he looks at his mother. And 4 hours later, he knows which face is his mother's face, because he's really looked over his mother. It's the longest period for a month. He will look for 5 minutes when he wakes up, but he'll not have this very long period. That is probably the result of epinephrine in his circulation from birth.
When I started learning about these hormones that women release and that babies release, and the cocktail that they share together, and when I learned that is most heightened the first hour and a half after birth, I remembered all the years that I worked in a hospital, where in the first hour and a half of birth we did most of the procedures. We took the babies away from their mothers to weigh them, to measure them, to wash them from the medication that we gave them. And then we handed the babies back to the moms, usually when they went into that deep sleep, which starts an hour or two after the birth experience. So I realized that hospital procedures are interfering the most exactly at the time when we should not take the baby away from the mom.
Why do we weigh a baby? It's going to weigh the same an hour or so later. We certainly don't need to bathe the baby. They've been in a bath of water for 9 months. And if they do have a little bit of cook on them, just wipe them down with a towel, and this can all be done right on the mother.
The baby can stay with you the whole time. If they really need to take the baby's temperature right away, they can take the temperature under the baby's arms in the father's arms. The baby does not need eye drops unless you're not sure whether or not you have gonorrhea. The baby doesn't need a shot of vitamin K. That vitamin K is better off given orally later. Babies don't need baths. They're not dirty, they're gooey. It doesn't make sense to separate a mother, a father, and a baby during the first hour or 20 hours of life.
We accept that in the animal kingdom, right? I once saw a baby seal washed up on a beach by the ocean, and people wouldn't touch that baby. They knew that something important was happening. They knew if they touched that baby that the mother would not want that baby. So we know in the animal world that there's some important thing that happens right after birth that attaches the mother and the baby to each other. But in our society, we mess with that.
I think as a society, we're in such a rush to do all these things, and we aren't realizing that this newborn, this is their first moments to take in, to see what the world is like, to see, to smell, to touch, to hear, to feel their parents. And we need to allow them to bond and to have that and not disturb this really, really, I think, sacred time in a baby and a family's life.
You're really kind of one unit. You've been feeling the same emotions for all the months of pregnancy, and that doesn't change. Birth is not supposed to be about separation.
It's a lot of work taking care of a newborn baby. They need lots of love and lots of care, lots of touch, lots of attention, lots of breastfeeding, lots of holding. I found over the years it's really important to talk to parents prenatally about what their life is going to look like when a baby comes. It's just hard to conceptualize. I just talked to a mom last night, and she was telling me that she is, in about 6 weeks, she'll give birth. She's a single mom, and she also runs her own business, and she expects to do a lot of business from now until, whenever. And I really imparted to her that, it's important for her to think about the fact that when she gives birth, she has just created a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, full-time job.
For most of modern women, it's a lot of work to even come to grips of preparing for the moment when the world as she knew it will end. When she has her first child, nothing will be the same anymore. She's not going to be the same. Her relationship with her husband will not be the same. Her relationship with her parents, with her siblings, with nothing, with her career. It's a very big event in a woman's life.
A lot of women get to the postpartum and they've had a C-section and nobody told them the amount of incredible discomfort that they were going to have. Or women have a natural birth and now they think, oh, breastfeeding is this easy thing to do. And then they spend the first 3 or 4 or 5 days with a baby that can't latch on properly or is crying all the time or isn't gaining the weight that somebody told them they should be gaining. And if we haven't told women during pregnancy that postpartum is a challenging time and it's a time of incredible emotional upheaval for a lot of women, then women end up very isolated and the risk of postpartum anxiety and depression goes on.
No one, nobody, unless they've lived with a newborn, know the time that it takes. I can remember my husband would come home and he would come home from work and it almost put me in tears. He looked at the house, it was a total mess. I hadn't even showered and the sun was going down. And he one time said, what were you doing all day? I broke. It's 24/7 what you do with these children, especially at the onset.
Your baby, newborn baby, is going to need to be fed at the very least 8 times in every 24 hours, but anywhere up to 12 to 15, maybe even a little bit more times in 24 hours. So it's a lot. It's going to take up all of your time. In the newborn period, babies sleep during the day. They wake frequently during the night. And it's really important that moms and dads are given the opportunity to adjust their schedule as well. What women also forget is that they're recovering from childbirth. And the way nature has it designed, when you're feeding the baby, all around the clock, your uterus is contracting. It's shrinking back down to size. And also, you're not able to get up as much, and like I like to say, run the streets. You are kind of attached. You're kind of made to rest. And that's what we need after we give birth. We forget that we need time to heal as well.
A lot of people think that when the baby's out, and now that you can, you feel good, you go party, you tell the world. No. Take that good feeling and sit on the bed and stay there with the baby and soak in that. Most cultures say there's about a 6-week period where your body's still open. And it's a gradual process of you're closing up after having been so very open. And so there's usually a marked out, usually 40 to 42 days of just kind of stay there and nurture that baby and get breastfeeding off to a good start, not pick up the load of the whole household right away. That's what women used to do for each other to make that time really special, and that's how we avoid postpartum depression and illnesses during the postpartum period.
A woman, more than any time in her life, when she's nursing, wants good, nourishing, warm, prepared food. How do we plan on this? Well, instead of getting the pram and the fancy from people, get money so that you can hire a post doula that will come in and do light cleaning, do your laundry, fix you wonderful food. Not a nanny. A nanny takes the baby down the hall, gives her the bottle. You want to be with your baby after the baby's born and be taken care of. And when I have workshops with the men, I say, this is not a luxury. This is a priority.
Honor that time after having a baby to allow yourself to bond with your baby, to breastfeed, and also to rest and get your energy back. Let's face it, even though we live in the 21st century, we live in the States, we are still women, we bear children, and it's important to honor that time.
You're integrating this new life into your family, and you kind of have to be on baby time for a little while. And we need to, in this society, give women and dads the time to learn this new way of being. We work so hard to fit the babies into our schedule, but when you have a new baby, if you allow yourself to fit yourself into their schedule for a little while, things just go much smoother.
What's often really challenging for couples in the beginning is the fathers feel left out. The mothers have had the birth experience, the mothers are breastfeeding, the hormones of the mother makes her totally attached to the baby and forgetting about her husband. He doesn't know what his place is. Often books will say, have dad give a bottle to the baby, that'll make him feel good. But it's not that simple, and that undermines breastfeeding. A couple has to really talk deeply about this and to try to stay in touch in non-sexual ways in the beginning, because the woman's hormones make her a little bit ambivalent about sex for a while, not forever, but for a while. That's confusing to couples. And fathers can realize that they can do so much.
If you make a list of everything that your newborn is going to need after it's born, they're going to need holding and touching and love, and they're going to need walking and bouncing and bathing and diaper changes and clothing changes and all those wonderful things. There's a whole list of things that you need to do to care for a newborn. And the only thing that dad or the partner can't do is breastfeed. But everything else they can do.
I'm very excited about this new generation of dads that are really getting to know their babies, because it really has to do with hanging out with them and getting to know them. And if the dads can also have an opportunity to have some time off in the early weeks and months, then that facilitates the whole family bonding.
The first 6 weeks of being a new parent is just difficult. It really is. And it takes that long to kind of get the hang of things. Around that time, it's kind of magical because moms kind of start getting the hang of it, and babies fall into a nice pattern, and it just gets easier.
In the old days, people used to worry that you could spoil a baby. And if you held your baby too much, if you were too responsive to your baby's cry, that your baby would manipulate you and be spoiled. But we now know that's not true at all. science has spoiled the spoiling theory. In fact, I got an interesting letter from the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Pediatrics that actually supports infant bonding. And it says very clearly in this letter they sent out to pediatricians, it said, the more you hold a baby, the more that baby feels loved, and the better you will actually enhance the baby's intellectual development. And some very interesting research shows that the way you can get a baby's IQ to grow to its greatest potential is based on how responsive you are as a parent to the cries and the cues and the interactions from your baby. It's the frequency and the sensitivity of how responsive a parent is. And the baby just soaks that up, and it enhances the baby's brain development to such a degree they've actually been able to demonstrate very significant IQ enhancements.
The skin is actually part of the same embryonic layer as the brain. So you can think of the skin as it's like neuroectoderm, and touching the skin on the surface actually affects our depths. And the skin has hunger, just like the stomach and the intestinal system has hunger, skin hunger. We're meant to be stroked. When a child is stroked, you actually decrease stress hormones and you increase bonding hormones, you induce better sleep, and so touch should be considered a nutrient just like every other nutrient.
Compared with other mammals, human babies are born neurologically the least mature of all. They only have 25% of their brain volume, which means, put more simply, 75% of their brain growth will occur after they're born, which makes the kind of care that babies get extremely important. The amount of touch and affection and emotion and breastfeeding that babies get is going to directly correlate with the nature and growth of their brain, the neurological connections that will provide the scaffolding for their intellectual, cognitive, and emotional development.
Probably the most important thing that you can do for your child, your infant, is to hold and carry them. Because holding and carrying them stimulates the neurotransmitters in the brain. They've been carried in your body. They've been used to nothing but movement and being in total close touch with you. So to continue that into the early infancy is really what they require. And people will say, oh, my baby cries all the time. They don't cry if you hold them. I mean, they don't cry. Babies really don't cry if their needs are met. If we meet their biological needs, breastfeeding them on demand, holding them when they want to be held, treating them like children, like who they are, and protecting and holding them, they're not going to cry. They'll be totally happy. So some women have figured out, baby carriers. You know, we've seen now slings, different kind of carriers are more popular now, because some babies really literally just want to be in arms all the time. So that's why in more traditional societies you'll see women with their babies in a wrap, and they are out chopping wood, they are working. There's no separation between working and mothering.
I was growing up as a child under the direction of Dr. Spock, my mother's guide for childbearing. And in that book, of course, he was the one that was saying, when a child cries, just leave it alone, it'll get over it. We now know that there's a lot more intelligence to that child than people used to think. They used to think, well, a child doesn't really know much until it learns something, so the brain is a big empty void. And this is totally false. The brain is totally active even before the child's born. And so basically when a child is crying out, it's crying out because it's disconnected or lost or unsure of the world that it's living in. What it's crying out for is some kind of information that I'm safe, I'm okay, there are people around, I'm not lost. And so basically, if a child doesn't receive any response from its crying, then basically it's really building in a deeper hole of protection. It's saying, oh my God, I'm not safe in this world. And protection has a child go inwards. Growth is expanding outwards and bringing stuff in. Protection is closing yourself down.
A baby's cry is his language. It's the only way he has to communicate when he has needs and wants. And in my opinion, a baby's needs and a baby's wants are all in the same. The parents should be responsive to both aspects of baby's cries.
Babies have something to say. Mostly it's, I'm hungry, and then I'm hungry again. Or maybe I've got a wet diaper and I'm hungry. But it's, again, foolish reasoning to assume that babies make noises or that they talk randomly. They're trying to get your attention. A baby's cry is not a pretty sound. Evolutionarily speaking, that cry is meant to be silenced. You were meant to respond when a baby cries.
Crying is totally unnatural to any animal species. An animal in the forest that cries is asking to be somebody's lunch. When a child cries, they're telling us, in the only language they have available, something is wrong. And in nearly all cases, they need nurturing.
Most parents are going to respond to baby's hunger cries, or if the baby gets hurt. Of course, who's not going to respond to that? But some parents are worried that if they respond simply to baby's cries, that just because the baby's bored or the baby wants a little comfort, parents are worried they're going to spoil the baby. But the truth is that your baby is simply asking you, I'm bored, I'm lonely, can you come play with me, can you come entertain me a little bit? All those day-to-day and hour-by-hour interactions all work together to create a closer bond, a closer relationship, and to enhance the baby's social and emotional development.
One of the difficulties in modern, urban, Western, I guess you'd say industrial society, is that we have tended to favor individualism and autonomy and have transferred this belief system into a recommended form of childcare that puts babies and parents at odds with their own biology.
The normal development of a child is to go from being very, very dependent to growing into independence. And it's that dependency and the security of that dependency that unfolds naturally into independence. The child who is hurried too much into independence will have not a steady foundation. They may not be able to maintain that because they didn't really have that foundation they needed to feel that confidence.
The best-selling books tell you to ignore your baby, to let your baby cry it out, to be deeply unhappy, in need of something, but there's strange logic which tells you that you need to teach your baby to soothe himself back to sleep. You need to teach him that he's not always going to get picked up. You need to tell him you're not going to spoil him. You can't spoil a baby. You can spoil a 2 or 3-year-old who wakes up in the middle of the night and you give her a cookie. But even a 2 or 3-year-old who wakes up in the middle of the night and asks to be hugged should be hugged. But during that first year or two of life, letting a baby cry it out in a separate room is really bad for the baby and bad for the relationship.
It only makes sense that those kids that are really, given a tremendous amount of affection and reassurance, they're the children that are going to be the most resilient when they get to be a little bit older. And now it's nice to see the empirical data is in fact substantiating that.
Your heart knows you can't spoil an infant. You can wear them, you can bond with them, you can open your heart to them. The most fearless babies, the most fearless adults are the ones who are totally bonded with their parents and know they are loved. They internalize that. They carry it with them for the rest of their lives.
There's no debate about whether or not breastfeeding is the best thing for babies. There's absolutely no debate about whether or not breastfeeding is the best thing for mothers or for society or for a baby's short-term health or long-term health. A mother who has chosen to become pregnant and have a baby, I think, should look at the best possible way of raising her baby. And that's breast milk. It's a continuum. The baby is built out of exactly the same protein mix and fat and carbohydrate as he or she was in utero.
The basic recommendation for breastfeeding in the United States is that all women should breastfeed their baby for a minimum of 1 year. And the World Health Organization's policy for all countries all over the world is actually 2 years, because we know a baby's brain grows and develops so dramatically during the first 2 years. And breast milk has some very unique ingredients that we can't mimic in formula or in food. And babies' brains need those ingredients to reach their full potential.
Breast milk contains everything that your baby needs. All the protein, all the carbs, all the minerals, all the vitamins, enzymes, antiviral properties, antibacterial properties, anti-allergens. Anything else besides human milk for a human baby is actually going to be deficient or going to be lacking Human milk cannot be duplicated. There's so many different properties of breast milk. We know of at least 250 different ingredients in breast milk. Those are the ingredients that we know of. Those are the ingredients that we've been able to discover.
The components in breast milk really mirrors where a child is in their stage of development. So when we're a newborn, ages, the first few months where you're doubling and tripling your weight, the breast milk is going to have the exact nutrients that baby needs at that particular time in his or her life.
In infant formula, the standard infant formula that a parent would buy today for their child, there's about 25 to 30 ingredients, and it stays that way from newborn, when you use it on a newborn, when you use it on a 6-month-old, when you use it on a 9-month-old. It doesn't change, it's not dynamic, it has nothing living in it. Breast milk is a living fluid. It's rich in immune factors, rich in immunoglobulins. Breast milk is rich in living white blood cells. In infant formula, there are none of these immunoglobulins. There are none of these living white blood cells. All of the living components of infant formula are destroyed during processing.
What they do is they mix cow's milk and water and sugar and some kind of an oil and artificial vitamins, and they mix them all together. And because they've got the same percentage of protein as breast milk, and by the way, they didn't get that one right for a long time. The baby's got way too much protein. Because they have the same percentage of protein or the same percentage of carbohydrate, they try to fool people into thinking that there's some vague similarity. There's no similarity between infant formula and breast milk. Cow's milk has a particular protein meant to build a cow. Human milk is unique, and it's not just unique to the species, it's unique to the baby. When a mother breastfeeds her own baby, that milk is absolutely specific for that baby, both in terms of nutrition and in terms of immunology.
If you cannot breastfeed your baby for whatever reason, the next best thing to actually breastfeeding your baby would be pumping your breast milk and giving it to your baby through a bottle or some other means. The next best thing after that would be donor milk. And donor milk is human milk donated by moms who are lactating, and that would be the next best thing. And then after that would be formula.
There are some women who can't breastfeed for whatever reason, be it medical, physical, structural. And there is a need for formula in those situations. I personally and professionally try to support every woman to be able to breastfeed because I know the impact that it can have on the health of a child. But each mother's situation is different and has to be looked at on an individual basis.
If, for whatever reason, a baby's fed formula, it's very important to hold the baby close to the body and to look at them. Because it's in the looking that the bonding occurs. And you gotta connect with the eyes. And you gotta hold them, and you gotta hug them. And that way you can overcome some of the problems of feeding formula in a bottle.
Breastfeeding gives major health advantages to both mother and baby. We know, for example, that children who are breastfed are much more likely to survive the first year. Children not being breastfed are 80% more likely to die in the first year. That's an American study, so we're talking about healthy, well-nourished populations.
Breastfeeding is an amazing benefit to the health of the immune system in so many ways. I mean, we're noticing that incidences of diarrhea and upper respiratory infections and urinary tract infections and obesity and chronic illnesses are diminished in situations where mothers can breastfeed.
There are more allergies if you don't breastfeed. There are more ear infections, there's more pneumonia, you get more E. coli diarrhea, you get more rotaviral diarrhea. There are certain types of cancer in teenagers that are increased in babies who are not breastfed.
Babies who are not fed breast milk are more likely to be hospitalized in their first year than babies who are breastfed. As a matter of fact, babies who are artificially fed are 10 times more likely to be in the hospital for some sort of illness in their first year of life.
If a mother is in contact with a virus from her husband or from another child, her immune system processes that virus. The immune system produces antibodies against that virus. those antibodies end up in the mother's blood, and then in her breast milk, and then in the baby's stomach, and then into the baby's bloodstream, and the baby is protected from whatever virus is in the house, either from an older brother or from dad. And it's like magic. It's called the enteromammary circulation, where a mother's exposure to a virus protects her babies with antibodies against that virus.
Babies who are breastfed have less incidence of childhood cancers. I'm talking about lymphoma. I'm talking about the cancers like Hodgkin's disease. I'm talking about even breast cancers. You lower your child's risk of getting breast cancer later in life by you breastfeeding them now. Moms who breastfeed lower their risk of breast cancer. Moms who breastfeed also have a reduced incidence of ovarian cancer.
Mothers who don't breastfeed get more thyroid cancer. Mothers who don't breastfeed become anemic at a greater rate because there's more blood loss. Mothers who don't breastfeed don't get their health back as quickly because breastfeeding costs a lot of calories.
Mom has these extra fat stores that happen during pregnancy, and when the baby drinks the milk, it actually helps burn those fat stores. That's what they're there for. So when you breastfeed, you're burning 500 to 1,000 calories a day.
If you go through the pregnancy, labor, delivery cycle, and then you don't go through lactation, you're asking for trouble. I mean, it's not a healthy thing for mothers to do.
But breastfeeding also contributes to this wonderful thing that we call attachment, to the mother and baby falling deeply in love and bonding with each other. And what that means when mother and baby are well attached is that the mother will do the things for the baby that are necessary for that baby's future emotional and psychological well-being.
It's so deep in our design, in our making. The mammal breastfeeds. Being held, especially when there is skin-to-skin contact, when the baby feels the warmth and hears the heartbeat of the mother while being nursed and nurtured and held. Psychologically, emotionally, it just sets the world as the right place to be. The safety of the mother's arms establishes the sense of safety of the world in general, safety of being in the body in general. There is nothing that can compare with that.
If we had lived in some other time or some other country, you probably would have watched your mother breastfeeding your siblings and your aunt breastfeeding your cousins, and you'd walk down the street and you'd see people breastfeeding. You can grow up to be a full-grown adult in America and know absolutely nothing about nursing, and you need support.
Set up help beforehand, before you have your baby, and commit yourself at least to working through the initial few weeks. Babies need to learn how to latch on, and moms need to learn how to breastfeed and how to position baby. So expect some challenges there and be ready for it, and that'll get you, I think, more prepared to get over those challenges, and you can enjoy a nice long-term breastfeeding relationship with your baby.
It's an innate experience for women, but it often must be learned, if that makes any sense at all. I know that it took me 4 to 6 weeks the first time with my first child to make sure that I had everything right and that I didn't wince a little bit, when I nursed.
There are some women for whom breastfeeding is difficult. There are some women for whom breastfeeding does not succeed for medical reasons. But those people are few and far between. The reason that breastfeeding doesn't succeed is because of lack of support from your medical team, your doctor, your nurse, your midwife, or from your family. There are very few women who can't breastfeed a baby.
If you have a lactation consultant or a breastfeeding counselor or a good friend who's nursed a few babies, or maybe your mother who nursed you and nursed a few other babies, get women around you that can support you and encourage you, help you through the first few weeks. Because once you've gotten through the first few weeks, then it's all smooth sailing.
Lactation consultants have been around for about 25 years now, and they also are worldwide, and they're a great, wonderful place to get information and support for breastfeeding. So people should look for board-certified lactation consultants to help them with breastfeeding.
La Leche League International is a world organization started by one group of breastfeeding mothers in Chicago who weren't getting any information on breastfeeding, and they founded this organization. La Leche League I've always loved because it's mothers getting together. And when I personally had a breast abscess and had no milk coming out of my right breast when my second child was born, I called La Leche League. So here I am. I'm a board-certified OBGYN. And I can only nurse on one side, it seems to me. I'm in postpartum depression because the milk's not coming out. And I call La Leche League, the 800 number. The woman goes, oh, I had the same problem. I just nursed on the other side for 2 years. Bingo! And that's what I did. You're lopsided for a while, who cares? So you learn from other women.
So it's really important for moms and dads, partners, to get information, start talking to people early, talk to them before you have your baby, learn about what breastfeeding is all about, learn about how your life is going to be impacted just because you have a child, and you're going to be better prepared. When dads support moms, moms are more successful. If dad is unsupportive of mom, mom has a much harder time in successful breastfeeding. So it's so important that dads really understand why this is important. You know, breastfeeding is the best gift that you can give your child. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can buy in this world. You can't buy this. This is free. And when men or partners understand all of the benefits of breastfeeding, there could be no way that they would not want their child to be breastfed.
Women who breastfeed really need to pay attention to what we call feeding on cue. You know, looking at the cues of your baby, and feed your baby whenever he or she appears hungry. We used to call it feeding on demand. However, by the time a baby's demanding to be fed by crying, the baby's probably been hungry for about a half an hour. Crying or demanding to be fed is actually a late sign of hunger. When a little baby wakes up, starts to get a little squirmy, is putting their hands near their mouth, is actively rooting or trying to latch on to anything that comes near their mouth, those are all signs of hunger. And it's important for women to feed their baby on cue so that their breasts get enough stimulation, because breast milk is produced based on the principles of supply and demand. And you have to meet the baby's demands or cues in order to develop a good milk supply.
There are a lot of women who think that their milk is insufficient for their baby. What I explain to them is that during the first day of life, a baby drinks about a teaspoon of breast milk. During the next couple of days, it goes up to a few teaspoons of breast milk.
The baby will be drinking colostrum, which is the first milk for the baby, that has been in mom's body since she was 16 to 18 weeks pregnant. She already has that milk. It's there waiting for the baby from when the baby's born. They'll have that colostrum for the first couple of days, and around day 2, day 3, her mature milk will come in.
A baby who breastfeeds on request, a baby who has full access to the breast, will get exactly as many calories as he or she needs, will breastfeed often, but to this very day, on the night shift in many very good hospitals, the nurses encourage mothers not to breastfeed, but instead to give a bottle of formula. You know, the nurse will walk into your room at 11 at night or 2 in the morning and say, you know, your baby's hungry and you don't even have any milk, and you know, we really should feed your baby. And at 2 in the morning, after you delivered a baby, you're pretty vulnerable to very bad advice. Research has been done showing that just one bottle in the nursery can increase the incidence of infant allergies. And at the very least, what that bottle does is it shakes a mother's confidence in her ability to produce milk. It may allow her to leave the hospital with her milk supply poorly developed because the baby didn't go to the breast that often. And just that one bottle really is damaging.
But if mom doesn't nurse regularly, as much as the baby needs it, for those first couple of weeks, you'll start seeing that her milk supply quickly cuts down. So at the point after milk comes in, the body is going to start to adjust how much milk it needs to make based on supply and demand. So whatever the baby demands, the body will supply.
Because we're a bottle feeding culture, we sometimes get confused and try to adapt breastfeeding to bottle feeding, which can be done on a schedule. But breastfeeding really can't be done successfully on a schedule. Breastfed babies can't wait to nurse. They nurse on demand sometimes every 45 minutes when they're little, because breast milk is by nature low in fat content, so babies have to take a lot of it frequently, and that's because we're what's called a carry species. We're a species that we carry our infants, so we nurse them frequently. There are other species called cash species, like rabbits, who put their babies in a nest or a burrow, and their breast milk is full of fat, and that baby can last for a long time while the mom goes out and looks for food. Well, we act sometimes in our society like we're that kind of species, but we're really not.
The American Academy of Pediatrics and almost every medical expert really discourages very strict scheduled feedings, because if you restrict a baby to breastfeeding every 2 or 3 hours, you might be missing out on the stimulation that your breasts need to develop a full milk supply.
If I put a pacifier in my baby's mouth and he doesn't nurse as often as he was, well, I'm not making the milk that I need to feed him, and the next day he's going to even be more fussy because I'm not going to have enough milk. Babies will have frequency days, they'll have growth spurts, they'll have days when they nurse all the time because they're building up the milk supply because they're getting bigger and ready to have a growth spurt. Sometimes that's hard for women to get used to in the beginning because it feels very demanding, but you begin to get a rhythm with it and just fit it into your normal day-to-day life in an easy way over time. So it is something that has an adjustment period, but we get very good at it.
The AAP, which is the American Academy of Pediatrics here in the United States, recommends babies should have only breast milk for the first 6 months of life. And that means nothing else besides breast milk. It contains everything the baby needs. At around 6 months, some babies are going to start taking a little solids, and it's always an introduction around that time. You're just adding some complementary foods to breast milk, but you're continuing to breastfeed, and you don't decrease any breastfeeding after 6 months.
I support exclusive breastfeeding for 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 months. I don't really believe that you run out of zinc or iron or protein if you're giving a baby breast milk without pureed sweet potatoes at 8 months of age. However, solid food shouldn't be started under 6 months of age, and it's so much fun at 6 months of age that most people do it.
If you give a baby infant foods before they're ready, before their system, their digestive system is ready to handle it, we have lots of problems that happen. We have, first of all, irritability. Babies can get very irritated. Their digestive system get very irritated by certain foods that are introduced to them too early. Any food that's introduced to them too early. Also, we raise their risk of getting allergies, food sensitivities, etc.
And I recommend starting with real simple, elegant foods. Organic, locally grown pureed sweet potatoes and carrots and lots of vegetables, lots of fruits. You could give your baby whole organic grains when you're ready to give grains. I recommend avoiding gluten. Wheat and other gluten-containing grains are harder to digest and they're not as good for you. Instead, you could give a baby brown rice and oatmeal, which may have a little gluten, or quinoa, organic quinoa cereal, which comes commercially made.
It's very critical during the developmental years that babies are raised as organically as they can. Baby's brain is developing, and we know that pesticides in foods are directly toxic to a baby's developing brain. That's how pesticides work. They work by killing the nervous tissue, the nervous system of insects. And humans have the same susceptibility in our nervous systems.
A lot of commercial baby food isn't made well enough. The ingredients are not organically derived, and if you taste them, you realize you could do better. I'm very happy that some entrepreneurs are now producing organic, really healthy, really tasty, fresh baby food. Okay, it's usually pretty expensive. But you can do better than they can because you can make baby food that's 10 seconds old. Take one of the vegetables that you were having for dinner, cook it just a little bit longer and run it through a baby food grinder and do it fresh instead of frozen.
One misconception I hear very often in my office is drinking milk. Every parent thinks that as soon as their child turns 1, they need to start drinking 3 glasses of milk every day. But there's really no science behind that. Milk basically has a good PR company that has gotten our nation to believe that every child has to drink milk in order to be healthy. You don't have to get fat and calcium from milk. You can get these nutrients from many other foods.
Cow's milk, particularly pasteurized cow's milk, is associated with many ulcerations in the gastrointestinal tract. So many children on cow's milk alone have iron deficiency anemia. It's also associated with ear infections, asthma, and when a child drinks cow's milk, it can set up an allergic reaction that cross-reacts with other things in the environment, like cat hair, dog hair, pollen, and so on. So you'll often find if you remove the dairy food, the cow's milk, the other allergies will go away on their own.
If I'm putting down milk, the question is, what about the calcium? Well, it's fairly simple if you think about it. Where do the cows get their calcium? And the cows and the horses and the elephants all get their calcium from leafy greens. So, well, some people say, well, it may not be enough to get your calcium from leafy greens, but it was good enough for the elephants. I would think that our bodies would manage. There's calcium in lots of plant foods. All leafy greens, roots will have calcium in them, squashes, beans. You know, like if you have a nicely balanced vegetarian meal, you'll have calcium in 8 out of 10 ingredients. So it kind of adds up.
I've never found one diet that works for everyone, but whatever we do, I think it's important that the food be freshly made, if it can be organic and locally grown, so that we're eating food that, you know, is important for our bodies right now during this season.
Have fun. It's very hard to sell a pediatric solid food book or to write a chapter that's only about 3 sentences long. You know, buy a carrot, steam a carrot, smash the carrot, feed the carrot, have a nice day, have fun.
I encourage parents to realize your baby is a nocturnal animal, and a lot of your breastfeeding hormones are more active at night as well. You're going to be up. You are going to be up.
Somewhere somebody coined the cliche, I slept like a baby last night. And all I could think of is, you mean you woke up every hour or two and asked someone else to feed you? That's sleeping like a baby. Babies' sleep rhythms are dependent on blood sugar, which just goes up and down like crazy, and safety. Babies need contact, babies need the extra calories, and if someone really wants to get more sleep next year, don't get pregnant this year, because once you have a baby, you're going to get a lot less sleep. The rewards, obviously, are commensurate with the amount of work involved. The rewards are huge. But if you think that you're going to have a baby and return to normal sleep patterns or to your usual sleep patterns, you're wrong. Babies should wake up every hour to 3 hours during those first weeks and months. It is a rare baby who actually sleeps through the night in the first year or so. Babies are supposed to have contact, have calories, every 2-3 hours.
A lot of parents wonder where they should have their baby sleep. It really all comes down to trying various sleeping positions and arrangements and learn what works best for your baby and yourself. You might find that your baby sleeps wonderfully in a cradle right next to your bed. You might find that your baby is waking up every hour if they're in a crib or a cradle separated from you, but that baby might sleep through the night peacefully and happily if they're right next to you in bed.
Human beings all over the world sleep in many different arrangements and positions, but primarily babies always in some form or another, in some kind of furniture or another, sleep within arm's reach of their mother.
It's best to be in the same room as your little baby as opposed to putting them in another room. The reason why is because you need to hear their cues. You need to hear when they're going to need you. You need to respond to their needs quickly, and that's going to help them feel more secure. So there's all types of ways to co-sleep, and from sleeping with the baby directly next to you to sleeping with the baby in a bassinet to sleeping with the crib in the room, and they're all beneficial. It's important if you sleep with the baby in the bed to do so safely, and so you just want to make sure your area is safe. You want to make sure you have a firm mattress, and you don't want a lot of pillows around the baby or heavy comforters.
We actually know that babies that sleep next to their parents in bed grow faster. They show higher levels of growth hormone within their body. They feed a little more often, and I think it is a very legitimate way to experience a nighttime parenting relationship with your baby.
Periodically, at least once a year, somebody does a ridiculous study, what I call just pop science, showing how dangerous it is to sleep with your baby and how babies, you can roll over on your baby and there's an increased incidence of crib death. They call it crib death because it's associated with cribs. Babies who are separated from their parents have a much higher rate of sudden infant death syndrome. The serious medical researchers, James McKenna, for instance, will show you that real medical research shows a dramatic increase in crib death in babies who don't breastfeed, who don't co-sleep.
During the last 20 years, we've had the privilege of studying the physiology of mothers and babies sleeping together. And we recorded their breathing and their heart rates and their brain waves and monitored the stages of sleep that both mother and baby enter and how long they stay in that particular stage of sleep when they sleep together. And then we study them when they sleep apart. And what we've learned is that it's important for babies to be aroused a lot during their sleep, to wake up a lot, not perhaps for long numbers of minutes, but not to be caught too long in that deepest stages of sleep. I always say that the problem with solitary sleep, which has been this strange Western innovation, is that it makes babies sleep too long, too hard, too soon. Their brains aren't able to really accommodate that kind of deep sleep to be able to get out of an apnea or a breathing pause really quickly and safely. The recommendations these days, in fact, for our society through the American Academy of Pediatrics is to have your baby sleeping alongside your bed as close as it's possible on a separate surface.
The AAP has found that having a baby sleep at least in the same room with the parents dramatically decreases the rate of SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. There's something about a baby sleeping down the hallway in their own room, separated from the parents, increases SIDS.
When the parent is actually in the vicinity, that baby's physiology is changed clinically in a very positive way. Heart rates change, breathing changes, body temperature of the baby changes, especially when the baby's in contact. So when I do my studies, for example, we look at the relative distances that babies can be from the parents and still get some kind of physiological effect. And we find it's probably in the same room, within about 10 or 15 feet actually, but the closer that baby is, as we've measured it, the more the mother and or the dad is able to regulate that baby's physiology in a positive way.
I'm not a fan of the very harsh cry it out methods of baby training at night and letting your baby cry for prolonged periods. There's some research that shows prolonged intense crying is actually not good for a baby's brain. It floods the baby's brain with stress hormones, particularly cortisol. And we know as a medical fact that cortisol damages nerve cells. When you get too much cortisol within your brain, it actually shrinks the nerve cells and causes the nerve endings to degenerate. And when you have a new baby whose brain is trying to do the opposite of that, the baby's brain is trying to grow and expand and form nerve connections and get all the brain cells to hook up with each other and form pathways that are going to determine the baby's function for the rest of his life, you don't want to be damaging any of those nerve cells. So I strongly urge parents to avoid any prolonged, intense periods of crying when they're trying to teach their baby to sleep. Of course, if a baby's going to cry just for a few minutes, sure, I mean, that's harmless. But it's those 15, 20-minute, half-hour intense periods every single night, night after night, that I think are not good for a developing baby.
All babies require 24 hours a day attention. They're born so vulnerable and emotionally they don't know that somebody wrote a book that says that between 8 and 6 in the morning they're not supposed to be touched or cared for. Everything we know about primate mammals is that touching and being close to the parent only benefits their ability to fight disease, increases their breastfeeding, etc. So it's just a strange cultural figment of someone's imagination, and it was that children somehow would be better off not being close or sleeping with their parents. And every scientific study shows that that attention, that caring benefits the child. And studies show that a baby doesn't really sleep through the night until between 2 and 3 years. But we expect and impose upon babies adult expectations. And so then we're surprised, why are they waking up? They're bothering me, why can't I sleep? Well, they're very definables, physiological experiences that they're going through that make you understand why babies would wake up at night. And we have to develop compassion as parents. If we fight this and think we can teach it out of them, or we think it's some kind of a habit as opposed to a need, we will either alienate ourselves from our children by, letting them cry it out, which will break our heart, or, we'll just make a problem into more of a problem.
I often joke to parents when they complain about night waking to me is I tell them, well, you signed up for this. When you had the baby, you're signing up for every aspect of what it means to be a parent, and that goes on during the day and the night. Parents need to realize when they're looking at the decision of circumcision, they shouldn't be doing it because they think their baby's going to receive any medical or health benefits, because there really are no significant health benefits to being circumcised. The decision is purely a cosmetic decision or a religious decision. It's all based on what you think you want your baby to look like or what you think he will want to look like when he's older.
There isn't one single medical reason to circumcise a baby, although we keep hearing studies about it, and then when you look further at the studies, you'll find that they don't hold any weight.
Circumcision today is most often practiced by Muslims, Jews, and North Americans. But 85% of the males in the world have a normal penis.
A foreskin is like an eyelid, and it's meant to be there for protection. It has many properties that are protective, lubricating, antibacterial, and important for sexual sensation as well.
Now, the majority of babies are not being circumcised. We've changed from a society in which most babies were circumcised, and this is medically circumcised, to now the majority of babies are not. So it remains a religious practice, and I can't really speak about that because I think that's a personal thing, and that is something a person is going to have to come to on their own. But even for religious circumcision, I know people that have chosen alternative ceremonies and made options not to circumcise.
There's 6,000 years of Jewish history which mandate this for people of that religion. But I would argue that even people of the Jewish religion could look at these 613 laws in the Bible and realize we're probably not going to follow all 613, and at the very least it's worth considering not circumcising.
The American Academy of Pediatrics has now come out saying it is no longer a necessary procedure, and I've seen a lot of American fathers be a little bit apprehensive about this. I think one of the big feelings amongst fathers is, I want my son to feel comfortable, I want him to look like me. And what I typically tell dads or dads-to-be is that when your son will look like you, he'll be 15 or 16 years old, and he's not going to want to be comparing at that stage anyway. But when he's a baby and you're a grown man and you're taking a shower together, the two of you naturally look different anyway. So I think that a lot more American men are coming around to the idea. Certainly groups are being started that talk to us about the hazards of circumcision.
Circumcision is not a benign surgery. There are risks. Hemorrhage, that's bleeding, and babies have bled to death. Infection, and babies have died from infection. Surgical mishap, where parts or all of the penis has been ablated. An estimated 229 babies die every year in the United States from circumcision. Nobody talks about that.
You are removing a functional body part loaded with nerve endings. There are probably 40,000 nerve endings designed for pleasure in the foreskin that protects the head of the penis. And we're doing that without that child's permission. This makes no sense. Circumcision is felt to be the worst pain a child can feel. It is generally done with absolutely no anesthesia. We know that it disrupts feeding patterns for up to 3 days, as well as sleep patterns.
It's a long, excruciatingly painful process. First thing that they do is strap the baby, 4-point restraint. After the baby's strapped and after the scrub, then the doctor comes in and applies hemostats at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. That gives the doctor something to hang on to and to work against. Then he'll force something between those two, a probe or another hemostat, which they open then all the way around, tearing the foreskin from the glands, and then puts a hemostat in lengthwise on the foreskin and crushes it to prevent bleeding, then cuts that tissue and puts in the circumcision device, and whatever kind of crushing is necessary does that, depending on whether it's a string on the Plastibell or a screw-down clamp with a Gomco clamp. And that crushes the foreskin, and then the foreskin is amputated. I once walked into a doctor's office and a circumcision was being performed, and if you ever hear the blood-curdling screams of a baby being circumcised, you know, without looking at any evidence, that it's not what you do to a newborn baby. At each step of the way, the baby's screams are different. And parents don't have an idea of what's going on behind closed doors. They don't know what's going to happen to the baby. And if circumcision were done in the hallways, I think it would stop tomorrow.
If you think about the limbic imprint of a newborn, you come into the world, and what's happening when you're born is imprinted as love. And so when you're cutting off the most sensitive part of a male body, and you're not using anesthesia, and this part is associated with sexuality, you're creating an imprint that is there for the rest of their lives. I've done hundreds of circumcisions. I have asked forgiveness of every one of those little boys.
Parents need to be very honest and be introspective and to really thoughtfully wrestle with that decision. I don't believe that little boys should be circumcised simply because society says that that's what one does, because there are societies who believe that female circumcision is okay.
The bottom line here really is whose body, whose rights. The body belongs to the child, and we have to care for that child and protect that body until he's old enough to make these very personal choices and decisions for himself. Our job as mother is to protect our baby. That's our instinct, and we need to follow that instinct. We need to trust that instinct. In trying to think about the different ways to look at parenting, I wrote these job descriptions. And so would you sign up for this position if you saw this want ad? Men and women volunteers, no experience necessary, no predictable schedule, situation out of control, long hours, unpaid, no training, no praise. We'll be expected to work to an incredibly high standard with little support. Everyone else will think they know how to do your job better than you do, and they will tell you. You will be the only one blamed if something bad happens. It's a totally improvisational position. But what if you signed up for this job? Because this is the job you're really signing up for. Men and women volunteers develop the emotional and mental capacity of an entire generation. Potential to inexorably affect the quality of life on the planet. Potential to improve the environment, ensure world peace, eliminate nuclear war. Job is like no other, yet will prepare you for anything. May hasten enlightenment. Value of job is beyond money, so payment is made in memories, self-esteem, personal transformation. Individuals are handpicked for this position. So this is really how it is. That other job description is true also. It is improvisational. It's supposed to be. You're figuring out as you go along. But when you actually meet the needs of your child and contribute to a healthy individual, who knows what can happen? Who knows what can happen in society if we had a society of healthy individuals who had had their true biological needs met and You can either look on that as a terrible burden and poor me, or you can look at it as a wonderful adventure. And at every moment, you're making that choice. You're making that choice to change the dynamic in the home to a more positive one, simply for your own benefit.
Children are a lot of work. They're not just cute little dogs and cats. You're taking on a destiny that you don't know. And it's a lot of work, we all know. I mean, the rewards are beyond and beyond. But you've got them from the time they're in your womb. On and on and on. It's big. And I always say it's the funniest occupation because the most important occupation on planet Earth is to be a parent, yet it's the least qualified.
I believe that if men and women allow themselves to listen to their intuition, if they allow themselves to really tap into that strength, then they will make decisions for their birth and for their babies and for their child rearing in ways that will be powerful and transforming, both for them and for their children.
So when I'm in conflict about an issue that I'm trying to decide that's very personal, say a vaccination issue, circumcision, birth, education, sleeping through the night, all those difficult issues that you have, I like to go back to the fact that there must be some wisdom in the fact that I'm the mother of this child. You can't know for sure that the advice you're getting is the best advice. You know that you're the one that's going to live with the results of your decision, the only one 20 years from now that's going to, remember that decision perhaps. So to me, it always comes back to trusting in my child and trusting in myself, and then I will know what to do.
Every child is different. Look at each child and say, what is it that you need me to be for you so you can live and unfold your life's purpose and destiny? Because these children that are coming through now are brighter, more intelligent, more lighted up, more creative, more fearless than we ever imagined human beings could be. And in many ways, they're going to be our teachers.
Your baby leads you into a new world of your evolving self. This is the payoff of motherhood and fatherhood. You're not supposed to just become a slave of babies. That isn't really what parenthood is about. It's about, with your baby, as a teacher, you are going to blossom in ways you never could do it if the baby never came to your house. Isn't this true? Don't you feel it in your heart? Don't you know it in your mind? Your baby is more than you're looking at. Your baby is a wonderful piece of good news. Your baby is way beyond what you think it is. If you think of yourself as a soul, and the baby as a soul, and not look at height and weight and all these crude measurements, then you'll be in tune with your baby and you'll begin to grow immediately upon the arrival of this spiritual being.
Beloved God, beloved God, beloved God, beloved God. May the precious flower blossom in the gardens of my heart, while I await the dawning of thy coming, while